Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Wisdom in the Best Books and Films, where we go through some of my favorites and look for nuggets of truth that can help us to grow in wisdom and be better people. This week is a special week. It is the 5th week in June, and I tend to go outside of our normal rotation for the 5th weeks. It is also the week of the 4th of July coming up here on Friday. So I wanted to do something a little bit patriotic this week and also a little bit of follow-up from last week when we talked about the devil and Daniel Webster. This week I'm going to start with sharing an article that was written by my friend Brad Baker, who is an excellent scholar on the United States and the Constitution, the founding of the United States. He wrote an article a few years ago about the Magna Carta and the importance of that and a few other things on the formation of our Constitution, which is right along the lines of this podcast because we talk about how we can learn from the past and different writings of people, whether they can be nonfiction things like the Magna Carta, or they can be entertaining books. All of those things are things that our founding fathers would have read. They would have read the Magna Carta and used it extensively in their development of the Constitution, but they would have also read extensively the famous literature of their time. Those men who founded the United States were, by and large, extensive readers. They had all great familiarity with ancient Greek plays and Roman books and philosophies and plays. They were very intelligent men, and so they are an inspiration for us. So let's start off with this article by Brad Baker about the Constitution and its relationship to the Magna Carta. And then I'm going to go into a little bit of discussion about last week because that's important also coming up on 4th of July. So, the United States of America is the greatest nation with the most individual freedom and prosperity the world has ever seen. An event contributing to the development of our incredible Declaration of Independence and constitutional republic happened 800 some odd years ago in June. One of my ancestors, and perhaps yours, was among the English landowners who compelled King John at Runnymede, June 1215 A.D., to sign the Magna Carta, which forced the king to recognize the supremacy of ancient liberties, to limit his ability to raise funds or taxes, and to reassert the principle of due process, acknowledging the now firmly embedded concept that no man, not even the king, is above the law, a milestone in constitutional thought for the 13th century and for centuries to come. That quote and others are from archives.gov. In the early 17th century, Sir Edward Coke, quote, Attorney General for Queen Elizabeth, Chief Justice during the reign of King James, and a leader in Parliament in opposition to King Charles I, used Magna Carta as a weapon against the oppressive tactics of the Stuart kings. Quote, Lord Coke's view of the law was particularly relevant to the American experience, for it was during this period that the charters for the colonies were written. Each included the guarantee that those sailing for the New World and their heirs would have all the rights and immunities of free and natural subjects. As the men and women of our founding generation developed legal codes for the colonies, many incorporated liberties guaranteed by Magna Carta and the 1689 English Bill of Rights directly into their own statutes. End quote. The colonists opposed the 1765 English Stamp Act because it was taxation without representation, and provided for admiralty court trials without a jury of their peers. The Massachusetts Assembly declared the Stamp Act, quote, against the Magna Carta and the natural rights of Englishmen, and therefore, according to Lord Coke, null and void, end quote. Massachusetts adopted a seal showing a militiaman with sword in one hand and Magna Carta in the other. Just as the barons at Runnymede had written down, to the honor of our God, to all free men, all the liberties they wanted the king to recognize, Our founding generation, on July 4th, 1776, listed the violations of their God-given natural rights in their Declaration of Independence, where they explained as follows: "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness," which meant the ownership and control of private property. Three of the important principles from the content and circumstances of the Magna Carta are found in our First, Second, and 10th Amendments of the Bill of Rights to our United States Constitution. Just as the Magna Carta began by acknowledging free will, and that the Church shall be free and its liberties unimpaired, our First Amendment restricts the national government from prohibiting the free exercise of religion, speech, press, and assembly. Just as the Magna Carta was violated immediately by King John, and then often later by kings and parliaments, and enforced only by the force of arms, our Second Amendment prohibits the national government from infringing on our right to keep and bear arms, so would-be tyrants would be afraid to violate the rest of the Bill of Rights, at least all at once, which is why the enemies of freedom have been using patient gradualism to remove one liberty at a time over decades. Just as the Magna Carta recognized the ancient liberties and free customs of all cities, boroughs, towns, and ports, our 10th Amendment explains that all powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Just as the Magna Carta was the supreme law of the land, our Constitution is the supreme law of our land, and all acts of Congress, and all regulations by the executive branch, and all decisions by the Supreme Court, which are inconsistent with our Constitution are, quote, according to Lord Coke, null and void. Otherwise, we are not what John Adams in 1779 called a government of laws and not of men. Because Thomas Jefferson said we must bind men down from mischief by the chains of the Constitution to prevent tyranny by a few and tyranny by the majority. Thomas Jefferson confirmed in the Kentucky Resolutions of 1798 that whensoever the general government assumes undelegated powers, its acts are unauthoritative, void, and of no force. The barons 800 years ago put their lands and their lives on the line to force the king to respect ancient liberties of all free men. On July 4th, 1776, our forefathers pledged and gave their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to protect the unalienable rights of men and women to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. We have been given much by God and our ancestors, and to whom much is given, much is required. See Luke 12:48. God will bless America if there are enough good people who never give up, but rise and rise again until lambs become lions, who stand up for freedom and proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. Leviticus 25:10. Because as Jesus said, knowing that the truth shall make us free, in John 8:32, free from the slavery of sin, free from the oppression of tyrants. The United States is a choice land, and shall be free from bondage, if we will but serve the God of the land, who is Jesus Christ. Serving Jesus Christ includes having the courage of June 1215 and of July 1776 to create sufficient understanding among Americans to support the U.S. Constitution and seek honest men and women for office, for the preservation and restoration of our constitutional republic. That's the end of that article. Brad Baker wrote that in July of 2023 and gave me permission to share that on the podcast this year. I think it's a really good article, and it also brings up some important points that I was also going to share. He talks a little bit about enemies of freedom and patient gradualism. He also talks about people needing to the good people needing to strive for freedom and do good things. Well, those are some things that I was struggling with 5 or 6 years ago. I won't go into specifics of the political nature of why I was struggling, because this isn't a specifically political podcast. If anybody wants to know my thoughts, they're welcome to ask me and I will share them. But I was struggling, and I had recently read The Devil and Daniel Webster, not for the first time, but I had read it recently at the time, and I was frustrated, feeling like, well, maybe if the devil got Daniel Webster around now, he might be able to find a pretty good jury. He wouldn't even have to look through the dead, and he could convict the United States of not being what it ought to be, that we weren't living up to the Constitution and the law. And I was feeling pretty down about just the state of things in general. And I reread that Devil and Daniel Webster, and it made me think a little bit differently, because it wasn't something easy in The Devil and Daniel Webster. He had to fight in The Devil and Daniel Webster to get the devil to lose. And he didn't fight in the way that we typically think of. It wasn't a revolution. Instead, the way that he fought in The Devil and Daniel Webster against the devil is he basically calmed down. When he was giving into his anger and despair and hopelessness, that was when the devil was about to have him. If you don't remember, go back to last week's episode and listen to it again. But once he started to win was when he started to think calmly and listen to the Spirit. And so at that time, I wrote this poem that was really me trying to work out how I could deal with the wickedness in the world that pervades everything around us. And this is the poem I wrote. It's called A Conversation with Daniel Webster. I won't claim it's fantastic, but I will claim it is something that helped me to figure out how to keep moving forward and be happy and not give in to despair. So, A Conversation with Daniel Webster. On a trip to Marshfield seeking advice from the grave, "Daniel Webster," I cried. A deep voice then replied, and a thin veil proffered the wisdom I crave. "Neighbor, how stands the Union?" the deep voice said. I knew what he sought, but hesitant and fraught, I first refrained from speaking, just shaking my head. Gathering a bit of pluck, I started to speak. Once a rock-bottomed land, it's now founded in sand. On the whole, things are beginning to look bleak. The devil worked slow, but his hold has grown firm. Men worshipped as idols, they think they're entitled, become elite, they have nothing left to learn. Once a nation of laws seeking justice for all, now all are victims, they say, media paving the way, and to the will of the mob, our laws are now thralls. When I'd said my piece, his shimmering form smiled. "The story you've told seems to me to withhold that not all good hearts in your day are beguiled. The devil's hold may be strong, but you know that I won. Though he stacked the odds with swindlers and frauds, you know that God's will cannot be undone. The turning point came from a pivotal choice. I was ready to bury that unscrupulous jury, when instead I gave in to a still small voice. Not shouts or anger, just truth, simple and full. What makes man a man? Deep truth that can span the vast moat blocking a hardened heart's soul. The devil would have truth lost in the din, but if we teach liberty, many will come to see God's plan is freedom, and it resonates within. If you would help these wayward souls be redeemed, as you reach out in love, don't push and don't shove, and you may find things aren't as bleak as they seemed." The apparition left, and I stood there in thought. We may lose the fight if we stand for what's right, but surrender makes losing our only lot. If with integrity and wisdom we are shod, we will see true victory with each heart we set free, for each soul is great in the sight of our God. That's the end of that poem. Like I said earlier, wrote that when I was feeling like there was an awful lot of idiots in the world, and I still feel like there's an awful lot of idiots in the world, and it is unfortunate, but I've also seen and tried to focus on the amazing goodness in a lot of people that are around us. And so if you get a little bit discouraged, think about this nation's founding and realize that even when it was founded, the revolution was fought by maybe at most a third of the people that lived in the United States. Now, I don't know if I would give it a third right now, but I know that there's some really good people here, and I hope that we can stand up for what's right and be grateful this Independence Day that we're born or raised or are now in the country that I think was divinely inspired by God, the greatest country that has ever existed on the earth. And I actually do think we're in a better spot than we were when I wrote that poem, so I hope we continue to go in a better direction and get more freedom taken back from the federal government to the states, work our way closer to that divinely inspired foundation. I'm grateful for those things this Independence Day, and I hope you all have a great week and a great holiday, and I'll talk to you next week. Did you enjoy this week's episode of Wisdom in the Best Books and Films? If so, I would ask you to please go and share with anyone that you can think of who may benefit from these topics. Discuss it at work, with friends, at church, anywhere where the opportunity feels natural and the topics would be helpful to others. I personally am not a huge self-promoter, and so the only way that this podcast will get to reach very many people at all is through the listeners. Please also share with me if anything that you've heard has been impactful in your life, or share with me any ideas that you may have of wisdom that you've gleaned from different books or films. Be happy to hear from you anytime, and I will respond to all emails. You can find information for how to contact me in the show notes. Hope to hear from you soon.